Your life offers you opportunities to make choices, whether I want to follow my why or not. Do I want to follow money and fame that ignore my why? Or do I want to follow my why and see what happens? I'm Simon Sinek, and you're watching Earthspeed, living by the cadence of nature.
You're live. We're live.
We're
Actually,
live.
We're not live. Pre-recorded.
Pre-recorded live.
Yeah, man. So happy. And thank you for jumping in, even though you didn't know the time, and accommodating me, sweetheart.
Of course. Anything for you, darling.
Yes. So I guess the audience will quickly realize that we know each other quite well. Well enough to whisper sweet nothings into each other's ears.
Sweet nothing, sweet nothing, sweet nothing, sweet nothing.
Yes. And yeah, man, I'm excited to do this talk with you just because we do have so much history, because you were there in the early days of me starting Earthspeed and coming back to the land, to nature. And you had some great insights. You actually helped to nudge me along towards this life. When I was still exploring and bouncing ideas off friends, came to you. You had some great things to say as a friend and a mentor that you are.
I didn't know this.
What?
I didn't know that I had anything to contribute to helping you push out into the land. So that's very nice.
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll get into it. I'll speak
yeah.
more specifically about it. But this isn't about me. This is about you. This is a podcast where I'm interviewing you, and it's funny because there was a time in our relationship when I was definitely the more famous guy, and now there's been a role reversal. I think you're the more famous guy, so I get to interview you.
Who would have thought?
Yeah, man, I'm so excited and proud. And by the way, Bijou might make an appearance every now and again.
Hi, Bijou.
Right. Yeah. So welcome to Earthspeed. I'd like to do things maybe a little bit different. I haven't listened to all of the interviews you've done, but I imagine that people want to mine your mind for your wisdom and for your personal development advice. And how much do you reveal of yourself? I'd like to get to know you a little bit. I'd like to understand, where'd you come from? Where were you born? How'd you get to the States? How'd you get into all this writing stuff?
Yeah, happy to share anything. So I was born in England. My dad had a job that had us travel around, an expatriate job. And so born in England, moved to South Africa, moved back to England, moved to Hong Kong, and then moved to exotic New Jersey. Most of my formative years were in New Jersey, in northern Jersey, just outside of New York City. And, had a nice childhood, one sister, and she and I are super, super close because we moved around so much. Like, she and I were the only permanent things we had in each other's young lives. So super, super close. But my journey to sort of the work that I'm doing now, none of it was expected. I am living proof that having a plan is pointless because my career went way off the plan. And I have a very different philosophy of how to live a life. But basically,
what was your original career?
Well, I was a marketer. I worked in an ad agency. Worked in a bunch of ad agencies, and I knew that I wanted to start my own business one day, and I knew that I wanted to sort of like do something in marketing. And that's what I did. I quit my job and I started my own little marketing consultancy, and, things were going pretty well. We had amazing clients. We did good work. Our clients liked us. And 4 years in, I completely lost my passion for my own work, and I was deeply embarrassed by it because superficially my life was good. Superficially, I had my own business, I'm living the American dream, all this stuff, but I didn't want to wake up and do it anymore. But I was so embarrassed by that I kept that feeling to myself. And all of my energy went into pretending that I was happier, more successful, and more in control than I felt, which quite frankly, pretty dark. When you keep darkness to yourself, it grows and grows and festers, and that's what happened with me. I became paranoid. It really was not a happy time. And it wasn't until a very, very close friend of mine came to me and said, "I'm worried about you. Something's different. Something's wrong." Did I come completely clean? And I had this cathartic experience being able to be open to someone about how I actually felt. That opportunity, that experience released the weight off my shoulders. So all of that energy that I went to lying, hiding, and faking could go into finding a solution to my loss of passion. And the solution that I found was this thing called the why. I realized what I did. I realized how I did it. I knew those things, but I couldn't tell you why I was doing what I was doing. And I knew that I had to find that one piece if I was to find balance again in my life. I became obsessed with the why. And more important than finding my own why, I also learned how to help my friends find theirs. And so that's what I did. I would help my friends find their why, and I would talk about it obsessively. My friends would invite me to share it with their friends, and I would literally stand in someone's living room and talk about this thing called the why and help people find it for $100 on the side. And people just kept inviting me to talk about it, and I just kept saying yes. Eventually, people started offering to pay me to come speak to their companies or some organization, and I just kept saying yes because I was so
finding people's why, writing the book about why became your why.
Spreading them, helping people find their way, helping inspire people to do the things that inspire them is my why. The book didn't come for 3 years later, until 3 years later. So the career of being standing on a stage speaking, I never wanted to be on the front of a proscenium. I liked being behind the scenes, and here I am now, on stages. That was not part of the plan. I was not one of those people that thought they had a book in them. Turns out, that wasn't part of the plan. But I was so passionate about the message that I was spreading that I simply said yes to the opportunities that showed up.
How does one's why interplay, or is it the same as one's dharma, like one's purpose? Like I think about that a lot. I came into, I guess, my why late in life.
Yeah.
I had other people's why that I sort of used by proxy. It worked, somewhat well for me.
Yeah.
Playing other people's roles until I found myself, truly, like the real me that hadn't come out yet. And I always just attribute that to my dharma. Is it similar?
Yeah, it's 100% the same. I mean, when I talk about why, I gave words to something that, first of all, I also attributed it, help people recognize that organizations have whys, companies have whys. And when I first started talking about this stuff, if you talked about purpose at work, literally you were some hippie weirdo. And people who talked about purpose at work really only were able to preach to the converted, which was a very small number of people. And, I'm not the first person to talk about purpose, clearly. It's been around for thousands of years. But I did find a language that was contemporary, and I found a language that made those who needed to listen. And so if you went out and talked about your dharma at work, there's a lot of corporations that are going to reject you, not because it's wrong, it's because it's the wrong language. It's not language they can access or use in meetings. And so the coup is language. But, dharma, purpose, cause, why, what they are foundations. They're foundations that cannot be changed. They are who you are. And as you said, you can follow someone else's and you can have success following somebody else's, but you won't find joy or happiness. And the success that you'll find is probably going to be short-lived because the personal toll it takes is too great. At some point, it falls in on you, whether it's loss of relationships, loss of marriages, loneliness, depression, sadness, lack of joy, however you want to define it, malaise. But true joy, you've got to have a very strong foundation. Like you can't build a solid house without a foundation underneath it. And this is the thing that I think people don't realize, which is, you only have one why. Your why is fully formed by your mid to late teens. You are who you are, and it doesn't change. Your life offers you opportunities to make choices, whether I want to follow my why or not. Do I want to follow money and fame that ignore my why? Or do I want to follow my why and see what happens? Our lives are our choices. It's not a question of right or wrong. You can live your life however you want, but all things come at a cost. You've spoken at length and quite eloquently about the cost of the choices you made. And ain't nothing for free. Turns out fame and money come at a cost. And to follow a path for your dharma also comes at a cost. You had to give up certain things. But the question is not what is the cost? The question is the cost worth it? You may have said yes in the short term, but you reached a point where the cost became too expensive for the life you were living. And now you would say, absolutely, the cost of the life I have is worth the cost and I like it. And I think that's the true test, which is the sacrifice, are the sacrifices I'm making for the life that I live, is it worth it? And if the answer is yes, then continue on that path.
So how does the fame and fortune taste?
Well,
it seems to me, if I may, it seems to me that you said that you were living a life that was miserable and that you didn't really mean it, and then you found the courage to abandon that fame and fortune, the wealth, the success, as a marketing person and then enter into a whole new, entirely different life. So was that the sacrifice? Giving up
Well, I would
marketing,
no,
would you
no, no,
say?
no, no, no. I would argue that I didn't have fame or fortune as a young marketer. I had aspirations, perhaps, but I hadn't tapped either of those things yet. There are certain costs for the path that I've taken. I lived a life on the road for a while, preaching my message. That came at a cost to my social life. I became very difficult to date because I was on the road all the time. It came at a cost of just being exhausted. I remember one year I traveled so much that I was in my own home for one full week once the entire year. And so when I had a vacation, I wouldn't go anywhere. I just wanted to stay at home, And so those things take a toll, but I would and I would say the cost was worth it because I felt like the work that I was doing mattered. So those costs were worth it. I did it with eyes wide open. First of all, you were much more famous than I ever was or will or ever am or will be. Let's start right there. Going
Oh,
out for dinner
you're
with
more
you.
famous.
Going out for dinner with you, I remember was a pain in the ass. And walking behind you, like as we walked into a restaurant or a bar, was always hilarious because every head turned. I always got a kick out of it. But this is,
I'll let you have it. Although I have a very different experience when I'm around you. But maybe I just get doe-eyed when I hang out with you because I look up to you so much.
oh. I don't think people realize that you and I have been sort of like we've known each other a long time. I mean, probably 12 or 13 years, maybe even longer. And I was just starting, and you were like at the top of top of the Hollywood game, of that one game that you were playing. But you and I have been bouncing ideas and seeking advice from each other for a long time. So it's nice. It's nice when you go on career journeys with friends.
Well, I'll tell you, I've met a lot of famous people, a lot of successful people in my life, and I don't really get nervous. In fact, maybe I'm trying to keep my cool, but I don't really get rattled when I meet, high caliber people. But when I meet people that are like intellectuals or people who have written books that I love, like Noam Chomsky. I met Noam Chomsky. I got nervous. I got tongue tied. I didn't know what to say because I loved him so much. Same for you. Like I met you and I was like, felt nervous and awkward.
By the way, I
guess it's a matter of.
It was awkward for me too because nobody knew who I was. I had a new book. I don't even know how you found me. I remember you reached out. You were one of the very first people to find my book and reach out to me. And I remember sitting down, I was like, holy shit, Adrian Grenier called me. Like, holy cow.
This is before audiobooks too, by the way. Right. So I actually had to read it.
And I remember showing up. Like I was so nervous. You were like the first celebrity I'd ever really met. And you were nervous. And the whole thing was very surreal and funny to me. I remember it crystal clear.
Well, listen, Simon, I see you as only not like one of our greatest modern intellectuals and thinkers, but a storyteller. Like your ability to communicate is really what sets you apart. Because a lot of people have great ideas, but to be able to language it and find the rhetoric and communicate it in a way that people can absorb it and understand it is really important. And we, as you were saying, these aren't necessarily new ideas, but as humans, we're storytellers. We sit around the campfire. We tell the same story over and over again to remind us who we are, to remind us, to give us tips on how to be, to guide each other through the world. You do that so well and so eloquently.
Thank you.
So the other book that I'm just, that has helped me so much is the Finite and Infinite Game, right? Those aren't new ideas, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you sort of took it and just like made it, modernized it.
Yeah. So I had read Finite and Infinite Games by Dr. James Carse many, many years prior. He offered a philosophical construct. And for those, let me just define the terms really quickly so people know what we're talking about. So in the mid-1980s, Dr. James Carse wrote this beautiful little, kooky little book called Finite and Infinite Games, in which he defines these two types of games. A finite game is defined as known players, fixed rules, and an agreed upon objective. Football, baseball. If there's a winner, there has to be a loser, and there's always a beginning, a middle, and an end. Then you have infinite games. Infinite games are defined as known and unknown players, which means new players can join at any time, and you don't necessarily know who all the other players are. The rules are changeable, which means every player can play however they want. And the objective is to stay in the game as long as possible. You know, we're players in infinite games every day of our lives. Nobody wins global politics. Nobody's declared the winner of education. You know, you can come in first for the finite amount of time you're at school, where we agree upon the metrics and the timeframes, but nobody wins learning. You can't win career, and nobody wins business. But if you listen to the language of so many leaders, it becomes very clear that they don't know the game they're in. They talk about being number one or being the best or beating their competition. Based on what? There's no such thing. Based on what agreed upon metrics, timeframes, and objectives? There's literally no such thing. And the problem is when we play with a finite mindset in an infinite game, when we play to win in a game that has no finish line, there's some consistent and predictable outcomes. The big ones are the decline of trust, the decline of cooperation, the decline of innovation. Dr. Kars had given us these definitions and went on this philosophical rabbit hole. And I was so enamored by his work, and it was changing the way I viewed the world, and it was changing the way I was making decisions. And I realized I was using his construct to see things through a new lens and build new ideas, that at some point I talked about it so much to people that I realized it was time to write it down. And I got to know Jim before he died, and one of the true great infinite-minded players was enamored, just loved the book that I wrote, and was so happy that I took the foundation of his definitions and built them into something that were more practical and useful in a modern day.
Campfire ready.
So he was really a wonderful man. I'm so glad I got to know him a little bit.
Yeah, amazing. So I think I've come to an infinite game lifestyle through nature. I think that the natural world lives on an infinite timeline and has new players coming and going, and the whole goal is to keep the game going, keep life going. And I live that every day here, and I'm learning that every day, that lesson every day. I assume that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, living at earthspeed, in the cadence of nature, in the rhythm of the earth, which is a jam session that goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, you're summing it up perfectly. And you look, playing with a finite mindset is trying hard to outdo someone else, you know, get more parts, get more money, get more promotions than somebody else. That you set up these artificial finite games, these artificial contests, you know, which don't exist in reality. They're completely constructs in our own mind. And they can drive us crazy, and they can make us obsessive. And worse, they can sometimes lead to some rather unethical behavior, because we become more obsessed with beating this, you know, this arbitrary competitor rather than doing the right thing or living a life a certain way. And I think what you're discovering, because it's true. I mean, you do live an infinite-minded life where the goal is to advance a cause, to move closer and closer to an ideal that you represent or imagine, knowing full well you'll never get there, but you'll die trying, which is sort of the point. And you know, you're in a state of constant improvement, which is what infinite-mindedness is. And you recognize that though you may set metrics and strive for those metrics, which there's nothing wrong with. You can absolutely set arbitrary goals and arbitrary metrics. That's totally fine. You recognize that whether you hit those metrics or miss those metrics, the work continues. And those metrics are simply markers along the journey, but they're not the end of the game. It is a magical way to live. And I think you came to that discovery yourself through your own journey. I've always found you fun. I've always found you interesting, but you are more inspiring now than you've ever been. I think because you live a very different life.
I'm officially changing the name of this podcast to Mutual Admiration Society. Well, it's planting trees for, you know, whose shade you'll never enjoy, right? You're thinking multi-generation. You're thinking through your children, through the future, through. You know, I always say, like, because life is infinite, you are an infinite being. It's never too late to make a change. Like, every moment is an opportunity to improve or grow or change or evolve. Whereas, like, the Hollywood lifestyle is somehow rooted in mortality. It's rooted in, you know, death phobia and all the contests, all the award shows. I always felt so shitty in those experiences because I was never good enough. You know, there's always someone cooler, younger, better looking who got the part and got the award that I didn't get.
Let's not go crazy.
They were climbing
Cooler,
that ladder.
younger, maybe, but not better looking. I mean, let's not go crazy.
Yeah, and so to just let that whole thing go and reject it and like get into an infinite rhythm is it's such a relief to the soul, and I think that's where we belong.
Yeah.
as humans. Like that's where we're most comfortable,
You,
ultimately, really,
the way you talk about this
spiritually.
it reminds me. I was walking down Hollywood Boulevard, where they have the stars of all the famous people in it, and I'm walking over these stars of people who, in their day, were the most famous people in their time. They were the Ryan Reynolds and the Steven Spielbergs of the day, and I'm walking over their stars, and I've never heard of any of them, and I realized,
Yeah.
like, the stars now that we look and we take pictures with as tourists, the Ryan Reynolds and the Steven Spielbergs, that in 50 years or 70 years from now will be completely forgotten. There's an irony, like the most famous people now who it feels like they're famous forever. It's really just for now and maybe a little bit longer. Like my niece and nephew don't even know the people that I looked up to, when I was their age. And that's not 50 or 100 years. That's, 30 years. And I just think that to live an infinite life, to your point, it's not about that people will remember your name, but it's the lessons you've learned and the things you've done will live on through other people. So think of, for example, a teacher or a coach from when you were a kid who believed in you, who took you under their wing and saw something in you that other teachers didn't see and believed in you. Tell me the name of one of those teachers in your life.
Mr. Schiffman.
Okay, so Mr. Schiffman, there you go. Now tell me all the teachers you had that day. Can't remember. And that's the point, which is there are certain people who pass on what they've learned or believe in us to the point where we will literally carry their names with us for the rest of our lives. And who we are is in part due to them. Don't you want to be one of those people that in 30, 40 years from now, I say, tell me then the names of somebody who believed in you, and they tell me your name. That's what it means to live an infinite life, that you literally will live on forever through other people. Though your work will die, your name may die, the impact and the influence you have in the world or in the people in your life will live on beyond your years. That's truly what it means to live an infinite life.
Where are we as a society? Have people found their why? Are the majority of people not living their dharma? Are people in competition, in a mortality mindset, fear-based, or are they living an infinite lifestyle? What would you say? Where are we?
I think we know the answer to that question. Most people are living with a finite
It's
mindset.
I teed it up for you.
Teed it up for me, right? Thanks. So most people are living with a finite mindset. Most organizations are operating with a finite mindset. Jack Welch in the 80s and 90s did tremendous damage to capitalism. The capitalism that exists today is not the capitalism that Adam Smith wrote about. It's not the capitalism that Thomas Jefferson embraced when he was writing the Declaration of Independence. It's not the capitalism that made America great, quite frankly. It is a distorted, broken form of capitalism that was broken by a small group of people for personal gain, and a greater number have suffered as a result. And it is finite-mindedness. Capitalism, when it works well, is infinite-minded. Capitalism, when it works well, is about improving the quality of product for the consumer, not looking to put cheaper ingredients in to increase margin. That's not what it's about. It's about quality of product, and that we believe competition is a good thing, that monopolies are bad things. We are suffering the ills of a distorted capitalism with a decline of trust amongst politicians, a decline of trust amongst the population. We see it with the egregious behavior of certain companies where they are willing to cut corners or put unhealthy ingredients in their products so they can squeeze an extra point out, that they prioritize the wants, needs, and desires of a shareholder over a customer or an employee. Which, by the way, is like a coach of a team doing what the fair-weathered fans ask while ignoring the needs of the players. That's what shareholder supremacy is. It's the same thing. But I believe that we can bring infinite-mindedness back. We can bring purpose back. We can bring dharma back and to a capitalistic society so that we make decisions that are good for our people and good for our planet. That is the only way to make a business survive, is if the people and the planet itself survives. Otherwise, what's the point?
So are you hopeful? I guess I've been stuck between an old mindset, even environmentally, where I really believed that we were screwed. I believed in a lot of the rhetoric that said humans are bad and we've messed up the planet and we should take us off the table, i.e. don't have kids, humans are the blight on the earth. To now believing that we actually we are maybe the most important creative force that can actually participate in healing the planet and healing ourselves and society. Where do you stand? I mean, it's not just environment, but it's also social. It seems to me, you look at media, like we are in such a dire place, but I don't want to believe that that's the case. I want to believe that we are on the up and up.
Yeah, I think we were tending towards good, even if sometimes it's frustrating or there's a couple steps back. But I am hopeful, and there's a few markers. I mean, the fact that I have a career, for example, I shouldn't have one. You know, I talk about purpose and trust and cooperation, and there should be no demand for my work. And if I were writing my books in the 1980s or even the 1990s, no one would buy them. They would laugh at me, right? So the fact that there's demand for people like me, the fact that you have a bully pulpit for the work that you're doing now, I think is proof that people are seeking something. They're seeking an alternative to what they've been taught growing up. So that makes me hopeful. The downside is people, particularly Americans, but you know, people are bad at long-term planning. We're just bad at making decisions that we either won't see the fruits of our labor or we won't see them for 20 or 30 years. And the problem is we want short-term gains. And, you know, it's why you can't sell cigarettes next to a smoking cessation. Like you can't sell cigarettes next to the patch, right? You can't sell a donut next to a diet book because one's impulsive and I get a short-term sugar rush, and the other one requires work and planning, and I don't exactly know when it's going to work, you know? And this is part of the problem with allowing scientists to be the marketers to save our planet, which is scientists are not good storytellers. And people are asking for exact things, and they offer vague answers, of inexact answers, which is scientifically correct, but it doesn't spur behavior. Plus, some of the language was terrible. The fact that they settled on global warming years ago, which was such a disaster, you know. So I think there's an opportunity for people like you to redefine what the cause is. I also think we should stop talking about save the planet. We're killing the planet. Blah blah blah. The planet is fine. The planet is fine. The planet will outlive us. What we're doing is creating conditions that cannot sustain human life. But if we die, the planet will survive and new species will emerge. And then if we come back in 100,000 or 200,000 or a million years, life will be thriving on this planet, but not with us on it. We're not killing the planet. We're killing ourselves. We're destroying livable conditions for life on Earth. The planet is more infinite-minded than we are, and the planet always wins. Mother Nature always wins.
Yeah, you know, exactly. So I do believe that we need to unlearn and maybe relearn our true nature, which is emergent from the earth, right? We come from nature, so there's something within us that understands this. But we separated ourselves at some point to do our thing, to find ourselves. As healthy ego, got a lot of work done, but maybe it's time to come back to selflessness. I always think that it's that finite game mentality, i.e., an extension of colonialism, in which not only did we think we could go and dominate and have control and exploit nature and people, but that's even bled over into environmentalism. Like a lot of the rhetoric seems the savior stuff, like the white savior complex within environmentalism.
Yeah.
As altruistic as it may seem, it feels like it's like control, it's exploitation of people to tell them what they need to do, to have to do. If they don't, then they're going to, there's some sort of punishment in the end.
Yeah. I think you're tapping onto something which is very important and I've not often talked about, at least not in these hard terms, which is I don't think many environmentalists realize that they're actually hurting their own cause. Anger doesn't solve problems, and criminalizing or humiliating people or attacking people only makes people defensive and hunker down and dig in and reject the very ideas that you're trying to espouse. Anger doesn't solve problems. And true purpose, if we truly want to be stewards of the planet, and live lives of service, that means we have to serve others and try and help them on their journey. Some of them are further ahead and some of them are behind. We have to meet people where they are, So for example, we can't just come into a town and start screaming and yelling how we have to close the coal plant because coal is bad for the environment. We're destroying the planet and close the coal plant, right? Though that may be true, like you have to meet people where they are, which is you have generations of coal miners who rely on this coal mine to provide for their families, and they're making a living, and they can't hear your message of save the planet. All they can hear is, we're going to take away your income and offer nothing in return. And so, of course, they're going to hunker down and defend, not because they agree or disagree, it's because you're not listening. And I think for the environmentalist to sit down with the coal miner and to hear and understand and learn, and this is what we're bad at. We're great at preaching. We're great at talking. We're terrible at listening. And it's a skill set that is desperately needed more of in this nation. William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, one of the great peace negotiators in the world, he jokes that we have talk shows, but we don't have listen shows. We have peace talks, but we don't have peace listens, and listening. And I think if the environmentalists could learn to stop vilifying the people who they think are the cause of all evil and learn to see them as human. I recently published a book by a wonderful woman named Robin Steinberg called The Courage of Compassion. Robin Steinberg is a career public defender and also a criminal justice reformer. She was the founder of the Bail Project. And she had to learn to see her clients as human, otherwise how could she mount a vigorous defense for them? And some of them, she had to see them as human. They didn't even commit the crimes they did. And her ability to see other people as human and learn compassion for people that she doesn't sometimes like or agree with, I think the lessons that she wrote about are the lessons that we all need desperately, that we can learn to see that crazy uncle that we disagree with at Thanksgiving. The advice given is don't bring up politics, don't bring up the environment at the Thanksgiving table. No, do bring it up, but learn to listen to somebody who disagrees or opposes with you. And instead of fighting with them and trying to win and score points and prove them wrong, try to understand what their point of view is and where they come from. And only at that point, when somebody feels seen and heard and validated, and I know people say, well, they don't deserve to be seen. So we're setting up a construction of right and wrong. That's what we're doing. I'm right, you're wrong, which all it does is create the same construction on the other side of the political aisle. And so the leader is the one that goes first. It doesn't matter who goes first. One of you has to go first. And the one who chooses to learn to listen first and understand is the one that will make the great breakthrough. And by the way, people will only listen to you after they feel heard first. Fact.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, I mean, I got to where I am. I got to Texas because it was a great big re-listening, like learning to listen. You remember, Texas was a flyover state. It's like, what, huh? Don't hit nothing. You just go right over. It's like you just ignore it. And it wasn't until I started to get to know farmers and start to increase my appreciation and sensitivity and feeling and listening. It's not just with your ears. You can listen through all your senses, right? Just increasing awareness and mindfulness and compassion and sentience about life as a way to further understand not just other humans, but the earth, the planet. You want to save the earth, and yet you don't understand it. You don't even go into it. You don't even live amongst it to be able to tell it what it needs, right? Because then we have these abstractions, these ideas where we're going to, seed the sky with, some sort of metal to reflect sunlight. And what's the externality of that? Or, we're going to tell other people how to be, and how dare they vote for this person when they should have done this, but you don't even understand why they did it, where they're coming from. And that's, I think, one of the issues is obviously it's social media, because we think we have greater understanding of the world than we do. We have to take the entirety of all of the burden of all of the problems around the world onto our shoulders, into our phones all at once. And then we feel like we need to soapbox and get the most amount of attention in order to be doing something by making the most amount of noise, because the algorithm tells us nobody heard you, so you better be louder. So all of these things are sort of, starting to act upon themselves. So what do you do? What's your answer to that? Do you just turn it off? Do you get quiet and literally just observe and listen?
In part, yes. My rule on social media is I'll only post something that I believe is additive, and piling on, it has its place, but I've made a personal choice that if I can offer insight or a point of view that is different or new, then I will speak out. Otherwise, I'm just noise or part of the noise. And, the left is very fond of talking about the right echo chamber, but the left has its own echo chamber too. That's the problem, which is it's like we have these echo silos all over the country. And I think the most important thing is, as you said, to listen to people who are different. I have a friend who is from rural Tennessee. She and I have very different views of the world. And as our friendship started to blossom, some of that stuff started to bubble up. And she believes in some conspiracies. I remember we were going for a walk together. She came to visit in New York City and we're going for a walk. And she said something, she was talking about some conspiracy. And I definitely thought, and I fear I may have actually said out loud, how can you be so stupid? And she stopped in her tracks and said, you just called your friend stupid. And I realized I was the one that had the problem. And I personally insulted a friend because I disagreed with how she viewed the world. And it really challenged me. Do I abandon the friendship? It's an option. Many people have abandoned friendships because they view the world differently. Or do she and I share values? Do I care about her? Do I know that she cares about me, that it's worth trying to figure this out? And I chose the latter. And she and I got very, very good at learning to listen to each other. So we both learned to replace judgment with curiosity. So when one of us said something that the other person thought crazy, instead of calling the other person stupid or thinking the other person stupid, we would go on an investigation. Tell me more about that. How did you learn that? And we had lots of very interesting conversations during COVID. Tell me more. I want to understand. It was genuine curiosity. And at some point, regardless of who was engaging, because we both learned the skill, at some point we would find a point that we could agree on. Or that there was a point of fact that'd be like, yes, that's 100% true. And in other words, we could validate each other. And once we found that common value, like if we could dig deep enough and find something we agreed on, from there, we could actually build up. And if we found that point, we both became much more open to each other's points of view, sometimes even changing our minds to see something differently rather than trying to prove the other person wrong and prove that we are right. And to this day, I absolutely love her to death. And she's one of my closest, best friends. And yet, based on modern standards, we shouldn't be friends at all. What we learned is that our values and taking care of each other and worrying about each other and caring about each other and holding space for each other is more important to us as friends than just simply how we view the world, and our political leanings and points of view. And I think that's the healing that America needs. And like I said, I don't care which side goes first. Just somebody has to go first. And the person who goes first is the one we call leader, as I said before. Not because you're right, it's because you went first. You were the one who stepped into the discomfort first. And I think we have to learn to replace judgment with curiosity and get away from this binary right and wrong.
The thing that makes us special and powerful as humans is that we're not born into this world fully formed. We remain elastic. We remain flexible for what is, so that we can always be in that learner's mindset and curious and open to adapt. And when we become certain, when we dig into what we know, we actually lose all our special powers.
It's a great thought. I agree.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Massive and what happened there? Is that
sure
kosher?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how top secret, how conspiratorial it was.
Yeah. So,
and what some of the discoveries were. And just for the audience, I was lucky enough to be invited to a summit that Simon hosts once a year called Massive. And every year they have a theme, a topic that is deliberated amongst the group. And this year it was patriotism. And it was an amazing 2 or 3 days in a beautiful location. And it seems like we came to something, and I'll let Simon take it from there.
So what I try and do is I bring in a very small group of people, a handful of people that probably don't know each other professionally or personally. And the likelihood that they will know each other is very slim, like they will ever come into contact with each other. So, obviously Adrian was there. We had a chief of police of a state police department. We had Robin Steinberg there, who they will never, ever, ever meet professionally or personally. We had an active duty Navy SEAL. We had a couple of CEOs from a couple of companies. We had a love coach, just a weird, funny mix of people to address this topic called patriotism. And we asked 3 of our guests to talk about what patriotism means to them and how their views of patriotism had changed or not. And one of the things that I think was fascinating and surprised a lot of people is somebody like Robin Steinberg who is this career public defender, founder of the Bail Project, she is a patriot. She loves this country. And the work that she's devoted to is trying to make the promise that this country set out to prove real. It is patriotism, not anti-Americanism, that drives her, which I think we all found fascinating. Patriotism, we believed, I think we came to the conclusion that patriotism is the willingness to sacrifice to serve others. I think, that we believe in this experiment, and we're willing to make sacrifices in order to advance the experiment. And without sacrifice, there's no patriotism. And that doesn't mean giving your life, in military terms is extreme, but it could be giving up wealth. It could be giving up time. It could be giving up traveling around, whatever it is, but some sort of burden that you carry that you don't have to, that you carry electively because you believe that it's worth it. And I think that's true, that patriotism fundamentally is an act of service. And I think the left needs to reclaim patriotism. We live in a world right now, unfortunately, where the American flag has become a symbol of who you voted for. And it's not what it is. And I understand a lot of people on the left reject that flag because it doesn't currently embody the values that some believe in. And, I think like so many things, we have to recognize, like our own families, like our own selves, our nation, like us, are imperfect. And our nation, like us, does stupid things and says stupid things and acts stupidly. And our nation, like us, has done things in our past that we are not proud of. And just like we ourselves do not want to be judged by the worst thing we've ever done, I think it's unfair to judge a nation by the worst thing it's ever done in its past. And the opportunity is growth, that we take ourselves on and we want to become better versions of ourselves. And as patriots, should we not work to make this country the best version of itself and live to the ideals that it does espouse rather than just espouse them? And I think it's, these 330 million Americans as a collective are just like us, which is an opportunity for growth should we choose to take it. I have deep patriotism. I wear hats with American flags on them. And I still believe in the experiment that is America. I believe that it's bumpy and sometimes stupid and sometimes disappointing and sometimes frustrating and sometimes maddening and sometimes infuriating and all those things. But I still believe that we're trying, what we have the capability to do here is worth it. That I think we could be a model for what the world could look like, even if we've made mistakes along the way.
Amen, brother. Amen. I would say, if we start with our own personal why first, before we start soapboxing and telling everyone what to do, and then we lean into an infinite mindset, then maybe we can start getting somewhere, listening with a heavy hand of listening. Then maybe we can start to come together, unite, and like make some healing choices for this country and for this planet and for this world.
Change starts at home. We try and get other people to change, but the reality is that if we want to change our nation or change the course that we're on or defend the planet in a way that we think protects the viability of human life on this planet, change starts at home. And some of that change is simply meeting people where they are and trying to understand them, and they're more likely to join you on your journey. Your journey will more likely become part of their journey is the minute they feel seen and heard and understood. Ironically, it's what everybody wants. And we can sit around and say, well, they should listen first. And you may be right, but they won't. So why not you be the listener?
More about telling like old stories renewed. What about the think global, act local idea? I think social media makes us think that we just have to scale at all costs. Yeah. Everyone has to be Elon Musk and their business has to be $1 billion company. Yeah. But what about just the things that we can do in our own lives that's small and take care of your home, take care of your local community before you have to change the entire world and all its complexity? In permaculture, it's designed from pattern to detail. So you take a step back and you look at the patterns and the flows of nature, and then you design the detail based on those patterns, but you're not, leave to God what's God, and then you do what you can do, right? Yeah. In your small, not insignificant, but your, relatively small part of the whole.
You remind me of another book that I had the joy of publishing called How to Make a Plant Love You, which is just such a divine little sweet little book by Summer Rain Oaks. Yes, her real name. So she wrote this book called How to Make a Plant Love You. And it's what you're talking about. She goes, so many of us, we buy plants and we put them in our homes where we want them because that's where they look pretty. And then they die. And what we're not doing is putting the plant where the plant needs to be to thrive, even if it's not where we want it, but it's where the plant wants to be. And I love it as a metaphor, which is we keep putting people where we want them because it suits us, rather than trying to understand the person and understand where they need to be to thrive, and then changing our lives around it. That I accept the plant in this corner because that's where it will thrive, even though that's not where I wanted it to be. And it's what you're saying, which is God will do what God does, and the earth will do what earth does, and I will work within those constructs, but not try to break those constructs just because it suits my aesthetic. It's a very, very similar. Her book is quite magical.
I really want to read it. And also I came across her recently because I've been doing similar content, and I've known her for many years. So we've been sort of flowing in and out of the same circles and for environmental stuff. But yeah, I'd love to, reconnect with her and, just talk shop, talk plants.
Yeah, have her on the podcast. She's great.
Yeah, I would love that. But, since we have you right now, when am I going to get you out here onto the land to get your hands dirty?
Yeah, it'll probably happen in the second half. It could happen in the second half of this year. I need to come down to Austin. I have so many friends who've moved there that I haven't seen in a long time, and I'm definitely due a trip. I don't know if I want to go to Texas in the summer, but
it's really beautiful right now. But you don't have to come here. I'm just wondering.
I want to come. It's not a question. I don't feel guilted into it. I want to come. I want to visit you, and I want to visit the farm.
Well, no, because we've talked about this, and as I was intimating before, we talked about being closer to nature and coming to nature.
Yeah.
Is there a part of you that's wanting to see what that's all about? Would you ever want to come live and design your life to be closer to nature?
At this stage of my life, being around my family is the most important. My niece and nephew live here, which is why I live here. I'm more responsible than most in terms of how I manage my sort of environmental footprint. Do I have the desire to live on the land?
I'm not saying it's about footprint. It's about the joy that you will receive when you're just in the soil and in the wood, in like the natural setting where there's no signs, no cars. It's just relief from all that.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is of course. I think the simple answer is of course. As a way of life, my family, because remember, as I said before, I made huge sacrifices to spread my message. Part of which is, I never found the person that I wanted to start a family with, at least not yet. And so my niece and nephew are the closest things I've got to my own kids. And right now, I want to spend all my time with them until they leave the house.
Well, I heard that. Well, there's a cabin with your name on it, and we could build another one for your family.
Well, you're very generous. I'll check with them if they want to move to the farm.
It would be great to spend some time with you in the flesh, man, because
yes.
Now that I don't come to LA as much, I miss you.
Yeah. Well, I will come down, and I appreciate the open invitation. I will take you up on it. I promise.
Yeah, bring the family. Kids love it. They really do.
Yeah, could make it a thing. That's actually not a bad idea.
Cool. Well, my man, anything else you want to share? Where can people find you besides everywhere?
All the usual.
simonsinek's everything.
Yeah, all the usual places. I'm so glad you invited me on. It's always a joy. I think you and I have even talked about this, making these dates to come on podcasts. It's just really an excuse to catch up and shoot the shit. Because I don't think what people realize is the conversation we're having right now, you and I would have with there's no cameras and no microphones, that we'd sort of bat around ideas like we are now. So it's always a joy to see you. Always a joy.
Amen. Love you, brother. Catch you soon. And let's not wait for another podcast to
please
to say what's up.
I agree. Love you. Talk to you soon.